The clouds were heavy with the threat of rain as the stagecoach rattled into Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, in the spring of 1885. Lucinda Shaw gripped her worn valise tightly, heart pounding with equal measures of hope and terror. 23 years old, unmarried and alone in the world, she had taken the desperate step of answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. Now, after weeks of travel from Boston, she would finally meet her future husband. The stagecoach jerked to a halt in front of the depot, sending a spray of dust into the air. Lucinda smoothed her blue traveling dress, adjusted her bonnet, and waited for the driver to help her down. "Silver Creek," the driver called out, opening the door. "End of the line." Lucinda was the last passenger remaining. She accepted the driver's hand and stepped down carefully, looking around the dusty frontier town. The depot was little more than a wooden platform with a small building attached. A handful of townspeople milled about, but there was no sign of the man who was supposed to meet her, a rancher named Theodore Blackstone who had written such promising letters. "Miss," the driver said, handing down her trunk, "you got someone meeting you." "Yes," Lucinda replied, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "Mr. Blackstone. He owns a ranch outside of town." The driver's expression darkened. "Blackstone, you sure about that, miss?" Before Lucinda could respond, a burly man with a thick mustache approached, reeking of whiskey despite the early hour. "Well, well," he slurred, "you must be my bride." His gaze traveled up and down her figure in a way that made Lucinda's skin crawl. "Mr. Blackstone?" she asked, taking a step back. The man laughed, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "The one and only. Not what you expected, am I?" He reached for her arm. "Let's get you home and see if you're worth what I paid for your ticket." Lucinda pulled back, clutching her valise to her chest. "Sir, there must be some mistake. The man I corresponded with was kind and kind," Blackstone roared with laughter. "Girl, you've been had. I paid good money to bring you out here, and you're coming with me." He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging painfully into her skin. "Please," Lucinda said, trying to pull away. "You're hurting me." "Shut your mouth," Blackstone growled, yanking her toward him. "You're my property now." The small crowd at the depot had grown silent, watching the scene unfold but making no move to intervene. This was the frontier, where a man's business was his own, even if that business involved a frightened woman. "I am nobody's property," Lucinda declared, finding her courage. She wrenched her arm free and took a step back, Blackstone's face contorted with rage. "You uppity Eastern bitch!" He lunged forward, shoving Lucinda hard. She lost her balance and fell backward off the platform, landing with a splash in the mud puddle beside the depot. Pain shot through her hip as she landed, and mud soaked through her dress, the only good dress she owned. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people who stood by and did nothing. "Look at the fancy lady now," Blackstone jeered, and a few onlookers chuckled. Lucinda struggled to rise, her sodden skirts weighing her down, mud coating her hands and arms. Her trunk and valise remained on the platform, just out of reach. In that moment, she realized the terrible mistake she had made. There was no future for her here, only humiliation and pain. "That's enough, Blackstone." The deep voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Lucinda looked up to see a tall man on horseback. He sat atop a magnificent chestnut stallion, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Unlike the others, he wasn't watching idly, he was moving toward her. "Mind your own business, Hart," Blackstone spat. "A man who treats a lady this way is everyone's business." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing broad shoulders beneath a well-worn leather vest. He was younger than Blackstone, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. "She ain't no lady," Blackstone sneered. "She's my mail-order bride, paid for fair and square." The stranger Hart stood between Lucinda and Blackstone now. "Looks to me like the lady doesn't agree with that arrangement." He turned to Lucinda, offering his hand. "Madam." Lucinda hesitated only a moment before accepting his help. His grip was strong and sure as he pulled her to her feet. "Thank you," she whispered, mortified by her appearance. "Daniel Hart," he said with a slight tip of his hat. "And you are?" "Lucinda Shaw," she replied, attempting to brush some of the mud from her skirts. "Well, Miss Shaw, I think you deserve better than this welcome to Silver Creek." He turned to face Blackstone. "I reckon any agreement between you two is void after this display." Blackstone took a threatening step forward. "You can't just—" "I can and I am," Daniel said calmly. "Unless you'd like to discuss it further." His hand rested casually near his holster, and something in his steady gaze made Blackstone pause. The older man glanced around at the growing crowd, then spat in the dirt. "She ain't worth the trouble anyway. Skinny thing like her probably wouldn't last a winter out here." He stomped off toward the saloon, throwing one last venomous look over his shoulder. Lucinda stood trembling, aware of the mud dripping from her once beautiful dress, of the curious stares from the townspeople, of the utter hopelessness of her situation. She had spent nearly every penny she had on the journey west. There was no going back to Boston, where she had nothing and no one. But staying here seemed equally impossible. Daniel Hart seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't worry, Miss Shaw. Silver Creek's got some decent folk, despite what you've seen so far." He retrieved her valise and trunk from the platform. "First thing you need is a place to get cleaned up and figure out your next steps." "I don't," Lucinda began, then stopped, unsure what to say. She had no money for a hotel, no prospects, no plan. Daniel studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "My sister runs a dress shop in town. She's got rooms upstairs. I'm sure she'd be happy to help you get settled." Before Lucinda could respond, Daniel placed her valise on the saddle and secured it, then lifted her trunk and tied it behind. He turned to her with unexpected gentleness in his eyes. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to his horse. Lucinda nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Daniel stepped closer and with surprising strength lifted her easily into his saddle. The crowd murmured as he took the reins and began leading his horse down the main street. Lucinda perched atop it, mud splattered but somehow dignified. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Hart," she said softly as they moved away from the depot. "Daniel, please," he replied, glancing up at her. "And there's no need for thanks. Any decent man would have done the same." But Lucinda knew that wasn't true. The men at the depot had been content to watch her humiliation. This man, this cowboy, was different. As they made their way down Silver Creek's main street, Lucinda felt the stares of the townspeople following them. Daniel seemed oblivious, walking with confident strides beside his horse. Lucinda tried to sit straighter in the saddle, despite the mud caking her dress and the ache in her hip from the fall. "Don't mind them," Daniel said, noticing her discomfort. "Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about by supper time." "I've never been the subject of gossip before," Lucinda admitted. "In Boston, I was practically invisible." Daniel smiled up at her. "Hard to imagine anyone not noticing you, Miss Shaw." His words brought a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment. They continued in companionable silence until they reached a neat storefront with a sign reading Hart and Holcomb Dressmakers. "This is my sister's place," Daniel explained, helping Lucinda down from the horse. His hands were warm and steady at her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough that Lucinda could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Deborah will help you get sorted." The bell above the door jingled as they entered. The shop was small but well appointed, with bolts of fabric lining the walls and a few ready-made dresses displayed on forms. A slender woman with Daniel's same blue eyes looked up from her sewing table and gasped. "Good heavens! What happened?" She rushed forward, taking in Lucinda's mud-soaked appearance. "Deborah, this is Miss Lucinda Shaw," Daniel said. "She had some trouble at the depot with Theodore Blackstone." Deborah's face darkened. "That vile man, was she?" "A mail-order bride," Daniel confirmed. "But that arrangement is finished now." Deborah took Lucinda's hands. "You poor dear. Come upstairs right away. We'll get you cleaned up and into some dry clothes." Lucinda hesitated. "I'm afraid I don't have much money to—" "Nonsense," Deborah interrupted. "Any woman who's escaped Theodore Blackstone deserves a medal, not a bill. Consider it Silver Creek's apology for such a terrible welcome." Lucinda looked from Deborah to Daniel, overwhelmed by their kindness. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let us help," Daniel said simply. Something in his steady gaze gave Lucinda courage. "Thank you," she whispered. "I accept your help." Deborah led Lucinda upstairs to a cozy apartment above the shop. She drew a warm bath and found a simple but pretty dress that needed only minor alterations. As Lucinda soaked away the mud and humiliation, Deborah bustled about, making tea and asking gentle questions about Lucinda's journey. "So you're truly alone?" Deborah asked as she helped Lucinda dress later. "No family back east?" "None," Lucinda confirmed. "My parents died of influenza 3 years ago. I've been working as a seamstress since then, but the factory closed last winter. When I saw Mr. Blackstone's advertisement." She trailed off, embarrassed by her naivety. "You're not the first woman to be deceived by that man," Deborah said grimly. "Though you might be the luckiest, thanks to my brother." Lucinda thought of Daniel's kind eyes and strong hands. "He seems like a good man." "The best," Deborah agreed. "Too good to be alone all these years, but too stubborn to do anything about it." She gave Lucinda an appraising look. "There, you look human again. Let's go downstairs. Daniel's waiting to make sure you're all right." Daniel was indeed waiting, hat in hand, when they descended to the shop. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Lucinda in the simple green dress, her dark hair falling in damp waves around her shoulders. "Miss Shaw," he said, his voice lower than before. "You look recovered." "Thanks to your sister's kindness," Lucinda replied with a small smile. "I've convinced Lucinda to stay with me for a few days," Deborah announced. "At least until she decides what to do next." Daniel nodded. "That's good. I should get back to the ranch, but I'll come by tomorrow to check on you if that's all right." "I would like that," Lucinda said, surprising herself with her boldness. After Daniel left, Deborah put Lucinda to work in the shop, noting her skill with a needle. By the end of the day, Lucinda had helped finish 3 dresses and had begun work on a 4th. "You're a godsend," Deborah declared as they closed up shop. "I've been swamped with work since my assistant left to get married last month." Lucinda hesitated, then saw her opportunity. "Perhaps I could help you in exchange for room and board, just until I figure out my next steps." Deborah's eyes lit up. "That would be wonderful. And between you and me, I think my brother would find plenty of excuses to visit the shop." Lucinda blushed, but couldn't deny the flutter in her heart at the thought of seeing Daniel again. True to his word, Daniel returned the next day and the next. He began stopping by the dress shop every day on his way to or from his ranch outside town. Each visit grew longer, the conversation easier. Lucinda learned that Daniel had inherited his ranch from his parents, who had been among Silver Creek's first settlers. He ran cattle on a modest spread with the help of 2 hired hands. "It's nothing fancy," he told her one afternoon as they walked down the main street, "but it's good land. Enough water, even in the dry years." "It sounds wonderful," Lucinda said honestly. After the cramped tenements of Boston, the idea of open space seemed like paradise. "You should come see it sometime," Daniel suggested, then looked embarrassed. "With Deborah, of course. On Sunday, perhaps." Lucinda smiled up at him. "I'd like that very much." The Sunday visit to Daniel's ranch became a turning point. Seeing him in his element, confident, capable, respected by his men, Lucinda felt something shift in her heart. The ranch house was simple but well built, with a wide porch and a view of the mountains that took her breath away. "It needs a woman's touch," Deborah whispered as Daniel showed them around. "It has since our mother passed." Lucinda could see it: curtains on the windows, flowers on the table, children's laughter filling the rooms. The vision was so vivid it startled her. This wasn't what she had come west for, but perhaps it was what she had been seeking all along. As the weeks passed, Lucinda settled into life in Silver Creek. Her skills as a seamstress made her invaluable to Deborah, and the shop flourished with her help. The townspeople, initially curious about the mud-splattered mail-order bride who'd been rescued by Daniel Hart, grew to accept and even like her. Theodore Blackstone stayed away, having moved on to ordering whiskey rather than brides. Occasionally, Lucinda would see him on the street, but Daniel was usually by her side, and Blackstone never dared approach. One evening in late summer, Daniel invited Lucinda for a ride. The setting sun painted the desert in hues of gold and crimson as they rode side by side, Lucinda now comfortable on horseback after weeks of Daniel's patient teaching. "You've changed," Daniel observed as they stopped to watch the sunset. "Not just on the outside." Lucinda nodded. "I feel different, stronger. When I arrived, I thought my life was over before it had begun. Now, Daniel prompted. "Now I feel like it's just beginning," she admitted. Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious. "Lucinda, I've never been good with words. But I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes. That day at the depot when I saw you in the mud, something happened to me. I've never wanted to protect someone so fiercely in my life." He took her hand. "And every day since, I've wanted to know you better, to make you smile, to be the man who deserves your attention." Lucinda's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, please, let me finish before I lose my nerve," he said with a nervous laugh. "What I'm trying to say is that I've fallen in love with you, Lucinda Shaw, completely and irrevocably, and if you could find it in your heart to consider a future with me, I promise to spend every day making you glad you did." Lucinda's response was to lean forward and press her lips gently to his. When she pulled back, both were breathless. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you lifted me onto your saddle that day." Their courtship proceeded swiftly after that declaration. By autumn, the entire town knew that Daniel Hart intended to marry Lucinda Shaw. Some gossiped that he had stolen another man's mail-order bride, but most recognized the match for what it was: two souls finding each other against all odds. Theodore Blackstone made one last appearance in their story, confronting them outside the church one Sunday. He was drunker than usual, ranting about stolen property and Eastern whores. Before Daniel could intervene, Lucinda stepped forward. "Mr. Blackstone," she said firmly, "you did me a favor that day at the depot. If you hadn't shown your true character so quickly, I might have made the worst mistake of my life. Instead, I found happiness. I suggest you look for yours somewhere other than a bottle." The crowd that had gathered murmured in approval. Blackstone, faced with Lucinda's dignity and Daniel's protective stance, slunk away. It was the last time they saw him. He left town the following week, reportedly heading for California. Daniel and Lucinda married in October, with Deborah standing as maid of honor. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the same people who had watched Lucinda's humiliation now witnessing her triumph. "Are you happy, Mrs. Hart?" Daniel asked as they danced at their wedding celebration. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Lucinda replied, her eyes shining. "And to think it all began with mud." Daniel laughed. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best futures." Their first year of marriage brought challenges, as all marriages face. The winter was harsh, and spring roundup was exhausting. Lucinda learned to cook on a wood stove, to manage a household far from any store, to be a rancher's wife. Daniel learned to consider another person in every decision, to share burdens he had always carried alone. But there were moments of pure joy: 2 starlit nights on the porch, Sunday dinners with Deborah, the satisfaction of building a life together. And when Lucinda told Daniel she was expecting their first child, his whoop of joy could be heard all the way to Silver Creek. Exactly 1 year after their wedding, Lucinda gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Lucinda's mother. Daniel held the infant with trembling hands, marveling at her perfect features. "She looks like you," he whispered to Lucinda, who was exhausted but radiant. "Poor child," Lucinda teased. "Let's hope she has your eyes at least." As if on cue, the baby opened her eyes, revealing the same clear blue as her father's. "She's perfect," Daniel declared, "just like her mother." 5 years passed, and the Hart family prospered. The ranch expanded, and 2 more children joined Elizabeth, a son named James and another daughter, Catherine. Deborah's dress shop had grown into a successful business, with Lucinda still designing special orders when she could find time between ranch duties and motherhood. On the anniversary of the day they met, Daniel always brought Lucinda a bouquet of wildflowers. It became their private joke, a muddy beginning that had blossomed into love. "Do you ever regret answering that advertisement?" Daniel asked her on their 5th anniversary as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. Lucinda leaned against his shoulder. "How could I regret the thing that brought me to you? Even the mud was worth it." Daniel chuckled and kissed her forehead. "I thank God for that mud puddle every day." In time, Silver Creek grew from a dusty frontier town into a proper community. The railroad came through, bringing more settlers and opportunities. The Hart Ranch became known for its quality cattle and the fair dealing of its owner. Daniel served on the town council, while Lucinda helped establish the town's first proper school. Their love story became something of a local legend: the mail-order bride thrown in the mud, rescued by the cowboy who would become her husband. Young women arriving on the train were often told the tale as encouragement that good men could indeed be found in the West. On their 10th anniversary, Daniel surprised Lucinda with a journey back east to visit Boston. She showed him the factory where she had worked, the tiny room she had lived in, the graves of her parents. "I understand you better now," Daniel said as they stood in the crowded city. "Your courage in leaving all this behind, venturing into the unknown." "It wasn't courage," Lucinda corrected him. "It was desperation. The courage came later when I decided to stay, to build a life in Silver Creek despite how it all began." Daniel took her hand. "Either way, I'm grateful. Every day with you has been a gift I never expected to receive." They returned to their ranch with renewed appreciation for the life they had built together. Their children were growing strong and capable, the land was fertile, and their love had only deepened with the passing years. 20 years after that fateful day at the depot, Lucinda and Daniel celebrated their anniversary with a gathering of family and friends at the ranch. Their eldest daughter was engaged to be married. Their son was learning to manage the ranch, and their youngest daughter was showing Lucinda's talent with a needle. As twilight fell, Daniel found Lucinda alone on the porch, watching the same mountains she had admired on her first visit to the ranch. "Still beautiful, aren't they?" he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Some things only grow more beautiful with time," she replied, looking up at him. The years had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes, but to Lucinda, he was more handsome than ever. "Like you," Daniel said, kissing her softly. "And us," Lucinda added. "Our story." Daniel smiled. "It's a good one, isn't it? The mud, the rescue, the happy ending." "Except it wasn't an ending," Lucinda corrected him. "It was just the beginning." As the stars appeared one by one above their home, Daniel and Lucinda Hart stood wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together, a desperate young woman seeking a new life, a kind-hearted cowboy in the right place at the right time. And yes, even a mud puddle at a frontier depot that had changed their lives forever. Their love had been forged in the crucible of the Wild West, tested by hardship, strengthened by challenge, and made enduring by choice. Every day, they chose each other anew, building a legacy of love that would outlast them both. And in the years to come, whenever someone asked Lucinda the secret to her happy marriage, she would smile and say, "Sometimes you have to fall before you can rise. I fell into the mud, but I rose into the saddle of the man who would love me for a lifetime." It wasn't the future she had imagined when she boarded that stagecoach in Boston all those years ago. It was better mud and all.